Hello, fellow yogis. I'm a little behind. Two sutras. I didn't get to record last week because I had some unpredictable days. If you've been taking my classes, you'll understand what I mean by saying that. I've been trying to utilize this quarantine time to teach the sutras on video. This is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and if you have this book, you could use your book to follow, or if you don't have the book and you don't like to read, that's really why I'm making the video. I teach the 8 limbs of yoga in my classes, but of course I usually only focus on 1 or 2 sutras per class, and or we just focus on practice in general, which is Ashtanga yoga, which means 8 limbs. I'm going to do a little recap because we're on number 5, 6, 7, and 8, and previously in the videos before, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sutra number 1 is now the exposition of yoga is being made, which means you need to experience yoga in order to truly understand the practice. And number 2, the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff is yoga. And that really is what the entire Yoga Sutra is all about. And that's understanding mental modifications. And your yoga practice helps you sift and sort and cease your mental modifications. Learn to separate from that. Number 3, the seer self abides in his own true nature. And that is you understanding that you are not the body and you are not the mind. And the seer knows this but isn't involved in it. So once you get your mental modifications dissolved or learn to separate from, you start to experience your true self, which is amazing. By making the mind clean and pure, you feel you have gone back, or you appear to have gone back to your true original state, which is awesome. Number 4 is at other times the self appears to assume the forms of the mental modifications. And so when your mind is not clear and you're caught up in the monkey mind, or you believe you are your thoughts, you tend to get caught up in it. And for instance, we tend to sometimes think and get caught up and attached to our clothes, to think that we are our labels. We are a mom, we are a dad, we are a man, we are a woman, we are our cars, we are our cell phones. And so practicing yoga really helps you learn to separate and detach and to become indifferent in regards to all of that. So, but it doesn't matter how long you've been practicing, if you don't keep your practice up and keep polishing, getting out in the outer world and experiencing, especially if you really do participate in modern society, then you can easily get caught up and attached to things again and kind of identify with them. And so now we're on number 5. In Sutra number 5, it says there are 5 mental modifications which are either painful or painless. And those are 5 kinds of vrittis, is what they call it in yoga. One variety brings us pain, and one variety ultimately can bring us pleasure. And I'm just going to read over some of these highlights. I'm not going to read everything in the sutras. If you want to read the entire sutra, then you can get yourself a copy of the book. But I want to highlight, just to kind of give you an understanding. Some thoughts begin with pain but end leaving us at peace. And others appear to bring us pleasure but can end in pain. So for example, if we see another person suffering, that can cause us pain. So if we turn on the news right now, guaranteed we may, and we will, sorry about that, we will experience pain. The news tends to be full of negative energy. So yeah, it definitely tends to be painful. But if we tend to love something or somebody, and it can be pleasurable. But many of us have experienced how the very same love that brought us pleasure can also bring us pain. We've all been For instance, we've sought friendships, and we in the beginning they can bring us a lot of pleasure, hanging out all the time, really having a lot in common. And then later on down the road, our feelings get hurt, and sometimes that can be permanent, which can bring us pain. And even dating, or even in marriage, our lovers can start out, blissful relationship, but then end in pain. So that's a good example. And so another example would be a thought like anger thoughts. So thoughts like anger can bring pain in the beginning. The anger of a selfless person has no personal motive behind it, although the anger may cause somebody to feel bad in the beginning, and ultimately it helps the person to correct himself or herself, and can lead to a better life. So this shows you how our anger, during that, it doesn't last, and in the end can actually teach us a really good lesson. And so some people say, I thought that in the name of meditation, yoga, we're supposed to make the mind blank without thought. But you can't make the mind thoughtless immediately. Many people try, but it's impossible. And so, even after 16 years of practice, I now understand that my mind is not going to be thoughtless. And it is not every time I get on the mat or every time I sit down to meditate that my mind is blank. It's not. I definitely burnt off a lot of both negative and positive mental modifications. Definitely have reformed my mind in such a blessed way. But when I do sit down to meditate, or I do practice yoga, sometimes my thoughts are full, and I'm separated from it. I've got enough space from my work that I'm separated from the thoughts. I, the seer, the true self, can see my thoughts out in front of me, and I'm not necessarily attached to those thoughts. I recognize I'm not the thoughts themselves, so they can easily breeze by. From time to time, I do allow myself to still suffer over some of those thoughts and do attach, but as we grow in our practice, that's why we have to keep our practice up on a regular basis, not stopping. It's part of a life practice, just like brushing your teeth. And so it's not easy to make the mind vacant. And so but the trick is, in order to help clear the mind or give it space, we can trick it by if we can separate enough to see our negative thought forms, we can say, oh, there's a negative thought. I'm going to purposely, with the power that I know that I have, try to replace that negative thought with a positive thought. And then we also recognize, we get to a place in our practice where we do recognize if it's a painful thought, will I truly allow it to make me suffer in this moment, or can I just let it go as well and not react to it? And so pleasure and pain in our daily lives, we will always work with these two categories of thought. Now, we know that selfish thoughts will bring misery, and selfless ones will leave us in peace. And this itself is yoga practice, watching your own thoughts and analyzing them. So, as we are off the mat, living our day-to-day lives, it's important for us to check in with ourselves throughout the day, many, many, many times throughout the day, and watch what we're thinking about, how we're reacting to others and thoughts as they come up. And the more we make that a habit, our lives will naturally flow better and become more peaceful. And so Sutra number 6, these are the vrittis, 5 different ones. They are right knowledge, misconception, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And today we're going to talk about just a few of those, not all of them, because it's a lot, just Sutra number 6 and number 7 and 8. So that's Sutra number 6, simple. There's not much of an explanation of that. He's just telling you what it is. In Sutra number 7, the sources of right knowledge are direct perception, inference, and scriptural testimony. So the first example is, we experience something for ourselves, therefore we know it is true. I see it, therefore I believe it. Or I experience it, therefore I believe it. And that's fact, so that's right knowledge. The second way is, a good example is you see smoke, there's fire. So you assume every time you see smoke, there must be fire. And another example given in the sutras is you see a cow giving milk. So you understand and assume that cows give milk. Then you have scriptural testimony, which is there are a lot of scripture, the holy scriptures, which we believe because they are words of the sages and the saints and the prophets. They have seen truth and have expounded it, so we believe them. That's why in the East, if anybody asks you to do some practice, it is expected that the scriptures also recommend it. You do not do something because I say so. Everybody who has gone down the same road approves it, and the ancient scriptures also approve it because the truth that truth is the same. So it's not something to be newly invented. So if, like in the scriptures, like in the Bible, even in the Yoga Sutras, they're written by saints or prophets that truly led a very disciplined life in search of the truth. And so we trust them, therefore that is a form of right knowledge. Now, when we do read the scriptures, the sutras, the Bible, any other holy scripture, the Vedas, other religions that, that there's probably nearly 6,000. And so it's important for us to also practice. We read it, then we try to experience it for ourselves, and then we come to this understanding that that is the truth. And so, like I said, I'm just going through these highlights to try to help you understand what these sutras mean. And so by all 3 of those ways, we get valid knowledge. So you have to find your peace through that. And so before you push out all thoughts, we try to analyze them and eliminate one set after another. So basically another example is when we throw out our garbage, we can't just put it in one pile. Nowadays, we're learning how to separate the plastics, separate the vegetables and the foods that can compost, and then putting the biodegradables in their own place. So we separate that, and the mind is the same way. The mind gets full of a lot of garbage. And so we learn to sift and sort, and with that we can throw out what doesn't serve us well, and even not throw out, but detach what does serve us well, because in the end we're looking for space, for peace. And again, I remind you that we have to practice. You can't just read the sutras and think that you understand it and it work for you. You have to practice it in order for it to, in order to experience what I'm explaining. And so you remove everything little by little. And one thing that I wrote in the bottom of my page here is that one thing that really benefited me when I was trying to sift and sort through all of my thought forms, there was a book that I read years ago, around 2007, 2008, called Untethered Soul. And it expressed in that book, which I needed to hear at that time, that my thoughts weren't happening right now. And learning to detach from your thoughts is important, but if you do understand, it helps you to detach even more if you understand that what is coming up right now, whether it be a memory, whether it be a painful or a pleasurable thought, even though it may bring you pain or pleasure right now, in reality it's not happening right now. And I know that we're grown adults, most of us listening or watching this video, we're all grown-ups, you know, but our minds aren't necessarily the same age as our bodies. And I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, just because I look like I should know better at 44, when I understood that I wasn't my thoughts and that my thoughts weren't happening now, I was about 32, maybe 33 years old. So I was grown then, and I thought that I knew better then, but I didn't. You know, it took practice in order for me to recognize and to benefit from detaching from those thoughts. And so that's great. And so the other misconception is when something is not based upon its true form. And so this is Sutra number 8, and then we'll be done for today. But Sutra number 8 is, for instance, a couple of days ago, I was practicing yoga out in the yard at the studio, and I posted on Instagram a little worm. I took a picture of a little worm that came up and slid it across. I thought it was so cute, and went back down. That was a pleasurable experience. But then I looked over to the right of me, right after I saw the worm, and I saw what I thought at first was a snake. So I jerked, but then I looked closely and it's this little stick under the grass, and I'm like, great, because I'm out, you know, and I thought, well, what if that was a little snake? It scared me. And so that's the misconception, misinterpretation. You know, sometimes we see things in the road that we think that it's a dead animal, but it's actually just a pile of leaves, you know. So that's the other example. It's short and sweet. And it can bring pain or just a moment of fear or turmoil. And so it's important to, because first I jerked when I saw it, thought it was a snake, but then after I realized it wasn't, I actually laughed it off and quickly turned fear or terror into pleasure, laughter. And so that's it for today. This week I'll be discussing 9 and 10, and 9 will be about verbal delusion, and 10 will be about memory and sleep and memory. So anyway, I know that this is not edited, and I could be seeming to nag or to ramble on, and I apologize, but I'm new at this, and I'm hopeful that you guys are getting something out of it, that it's helping benefit you in your practice. And yeah, so I'll see you soon next week. Thank you guys. Love you. Namaste.